I am a police officer. I'm a police officer first, but I wasn't born a police officer. I'm black when I take off this uniform. And to see the look in the room when he said that, you can just imagine. And so once again, Marcel, I can't thank you enough myself for it. Please give him a hand. I just can't even begin to tell you. So, what am I going to talk about? Well, real quick, and I'm going to go through it. I grew up in South Central LA. Some of you might know where that is. Those of you who don't know where South Central LA is, there's a few people that you recognize from there. You know, we had Ice Cube. A lot of the gangsters came from there. 2B Williams. I literally lived around the corner from where they grew up. And how it was that I ended up wanting to be a cop to this day, growing up in that environment, like some of you growing up in rough neighborhoods, Chicago, South Phoenix, didn't know how we made that decision. And I'll tell you how I made that decision. I watched the riots in Watts as a child, and I couldn't figure out why people were getting splashed with water hoses. And I noticed who it was every time. And I says, that's not America, that's not what I believe in. So I ended up growing up saying, I'm not going to be like that. And I would imagine all of you did the same thing. I'm not going to be influenced by drugs, gangs, or violence. I'm going to show in society that, hey, black folks can do it. We have the ability, let's get started. So I did. My career wasn't always easy. Those of you who've been in policing long enough know. Racial slurs, racial jokes. I'm 10-8. They have me 10-19 or come to the station, and the watch commander says, your code 7 is in the squad room. Okay, now I only been on about a year, so yes sir, Sergeant. I walk into the briefing room, and guess what's on the table with my name on it? Slice of watermelon. And they all thought this was funny. I'm a full-fledged cop and had to deal with that, and I dealt with it for a lot of years. And when I say a lot of years, there was no such thing as grievance. Who was I going to grieve? Mm-hmm. The people who did the jokes were the people I was grieving to. Wasn't going to grieve anybody. But I gathered some strength, and I will tell you that the Army came to my personal rescue, because in the Army I was able to progress. What I couldn't do in police department, due to the culture, the environment, I was able to do in the Army. The Army promoted me, became an officer, and I was able to do those things I couldn't do. I met General Powell, Colin Powell, and I went and bought his book right afterwards. How many of you have read Colin Powell's book, My American Journey? Not too many. Please go get it. It will inspire all of you. All the young officers that are wanting to get into this business and really get promoted, read his book. I'm going to give you just a couple of lines of what Colin Powell said. It ain't as bad as you think. It will look better in the morning. Avoid having your ego so close to your position that when your position falls, your ego goes with it. Colin Powell was heavy. It can be done. Check small things and share credit. I think as leaders in law enforcement, that's one of the things that I learned when I became a chief of police. I didn't think I'd become a chief. All I wanted to do was be a cop. All I wanted to do was get out there and be a gunslinger. But I found out that how I wanted to be a gunslinger was not the same as my colleagues. And all of you that have been out on the streets know exactly what I'm talking about. Again, the military provided me with a lot of support, foundation. As a result, I had a lot of heroes I looked up to. If you don't have them, they're out there. I looked up to heroes. A lot of mine were military. I was in the Army. But there were people like Nelson Mandela, I remember. Cesar Chavez, I remember. And there was a guy named John Sidney McCain that I remember as a young soldier coming up. Maya Angelou, used to love listening to her. Colin Powell and Rosa Parks. I've been blessed. God has been really good to me in my life. I met Rosa Parks. I spent 2 days with Rosa Parks. Sheriff's Department out in Riverside had a conference and a convention, and the sheriff had the commander call me and ask me, hey, we got a detail for you. Well, all of you know If the boss calls him the detail, you're gonna try and duck that detail, aren't you? You don't wanna do that detail. But as soon as he told me, he said, hey, you're gonna be on protection detail for Rosa Parks. The first day, I'm telling y'all, I was shaking. Okay, I couldn't believe it. I didn't know what to say. So I said nothing. Yeah, I was quiet. The next day, she says to me, she says, so how are you today? Fine, Miss Parks. You know, you're a big old guy, and I'm just like, fine, Miss Parks. And then I got to know her after lunch. I asked her the question. I asked the question. I had to say, Miss Parks, I gotta know. Why did you do what you did? It was chilling. Rosa Parks looked at me and said, I was tired and I wasn't going to do it anymore. I was not trying to start a movement, but as a woman I was tired. As a black woman I was even more tired. And I'm petrified. I mean, what do you say? And I'm listening, and it hit me hard, and I've never forgotten it. But these are some of the early foundational information and events that happened in my life that helped me create Transformational Policing Model, because I wanted to give back to policing. Policing's taken a lot of hits across the country. I've been fortunate enough to visit a lot of these places where these events have taken place. And some of us will look at these, and as I go through, I have a slide presentation that I'm going to do. Where did Tasha go? So I don't panic and pull it up. I'm going to go through that real quickly, but I want to leave some room for questions, because one of the main things the Army taught me is, you know, as I was a battalion commander, that means I was in charge of a whole bunch of folks. I always allowed my subordinate leaders to be leaders. I didn't micromanage them. I think in policing, I believed in the inverted pyramid. Even though I was a chief and I called the shots, I let my line level and my sergeants do the job and not interfere with them. TPM stands for Transformational Policing Model. It's a hybrid of community-oriented policing. It is what I call the 21st century paradigm shift in policing. You know how everybody's been saying all this week, we got to change, we got to transition, we got to transfer? Here it is. Those areas, when I was listening to everybody talk, we've got it already in here. Chief Glover, Jeff Glover, reached out to me and said, hey, let's put an article together in Police Chief Magazine. And in Police Chief Magazine, Jeff said, the move toward more equitable policing in America. How many, when you hear that, you have a thought in your mind, what does that mean? More equitable policing in America. Raise your hand if a certain thought comes to your mind. It's really important. It's really important. Yeah. So, one of the things that I used a lot was the 2015 final Presidential Task Force report that was written and put together by President Obama. And I had a lot of friends that sat on that committee. I had a lot of friends. Ron Davis, who ended up being the COPS director, he was on that committee. I had met Cedric Alexander, the executive director of Noble, and I talked to them about these pillars. How many are familiar? I'm really curious. In your agencies, line officers, how many of you have heard and read about the 6 pillars? Look around the room. I want you to see who has read these. Look around the room. It's really important. These 6 pillars are what one of my foundation is in Transformational Policing Model. Tempe PD, step forward. Tempe PD is the first police department in the state of Arizona to incorporate TPM, and I thank TPD. I'm looking at my next venture there, Chief, so he turned away because he knew I was going to say something. So, Why transformational policing? Why did Tempe do it? Because that paradigm shift is here. That paradigm shift is here. The onslaught of so many issues in policing. Do you feel like you're in the crosshairs of policing? I do. How many of you have been called Uncle Tom before? Raise your hand. How many have been called Oreo cookie? Raise your hand. How many have been called coconut? Yes, brown on the outside and white on the inside. Yes, and then what do you get from the other side? You get the big end. You go to a call and you walk in the door and say, oh no, I want a real policeman, not you. Anybody here experience that? Incredible. We live where? In America. What century? 21st. And yet, these are still going and still occurring. The preliminary outcomes from TPM, I'm impressed with. Raj will tell you, or Marcel will tell you in class, it was very interesting, and Karen was in that class. It's very interesting when you would ask those pointed questions about how you feel about Michael Brown. Well, let's do a case analysis of Michael Brown. Let's do a case analysis of Eric Gardner. And what I do is I give law and criminal law analysis. I don't know if I mentioned I have a law degree as well. And I use that law degree. It's like one of the best educational tools I've ever had in my life, because when people get to thinking, hey, we can get away with ABC, no you can't. But I break down through case studies these cases. And it's interesting to hear, I say, is a pack of cigarettes a death sentence? We all are going to protect ourselves as police officers. We're all going to be that warrior who we need to be. But what about the guardian? We always have that guardian ability, always. And we have that warrior ability. Look at your side, look at your badge. Couple quick comments. And these are straight from training. Taj, I hope you and Marcel and Tasha don't recognize these comments, but if you do, just kind of ignore them, okay? Here are a few comments from my training class. We'll say in the United States, because I've done Sacramento Police Department. So it wasn't just Tempe, I've done Sacramento, and I've done different associations in California. TPM has enhanced my personal development with a better understanding of my community and the people in which it is made of. With this better understanding and knowledge, I can help out myself, but my agency, and with my agency as a partnership with the community. Professionally, I can use this knowledge, TPM, in everyday situations. This is a police officer telling me this. Sitting next to the police officers' community members. TPM is a great overview of policing looking back historically over the last 305 years, offering tremendous insight on the past and how it can help us in the future. The class allowed us to look at incidents from the past, the case studies I talked about, and see things from another cultural perspective, and hopefully learn from the past so we don't repeat it. I could read the comments. The bottom line is eyes were open. On an average, just to let you know, you're kind of thinking, well, who's in the class? Every class I teach is 50-50, or 60-40 in some cases. I will not teach a class without community members in the classroom with police officers. Tempe stood forward, had their command staff. That means deputy chiefs, the chief, the commanders, the captains, lieutenants, sit through the training. That is called leading from the front. Okay, I've seen that a couple times this week, leading from the front. And it was outstanding to see that and listen to the comments. And a lot of the comments were based on what the perception was. The composition of most of the room what, Marcel? I guess the composition was probably 2 to 3 blacks in the room, 2 to 3 Hispanics, 2 to 3 females, and the rest all white. Does that make a difference in how the information is delivered? No. Because the common bound is unity. It's a unifier. And I will tell you, so many of the officers at the end of the day said, wow, people feel like that about us? I'm glad I was in this training. This is different training. It's not like the regular post training that I know I had. I had 21 hours of post training. None of it was relevant to me or what I looked like or how I believe. So many officers looked at this training and says, why wasn't this done sooner? And